You think you understand people better than they understand themselves. That feels true, doesn't it? You have noticed things others missed. You have read a room before anyone else felt the tension. You have seen through someone's kindness and recognized something colder underneath. And you were right. But here is the question I want to ask you today. Not what you see, not whether your perception is accurate. The question I want to ask is far more unsettling. Why do you see it? Because the ability to read people with unusual clarity is not simply intelligence. It is not merely a gift you were born with, like a sharp eye or a quick mind. In most cases, it is something the mind constructed, something it built, carefully and quietly, in response to something it once experienced. And when you understand where that perception actually comes from, something strange happens. You begin to see yourself with the same clarity you have always turned outward. That is what I want to show you today. Let us begin with the belief itself. The belief that you see what others don't. Most people who feel this way are not wrong, exactly. They do notice more. They pick up on inconsistencies in what people say. They sense mood shifts before they are spoken. They detect the moment a smile stops reaching someone's eyes. They feel the weight of what is not said. And for years, perhaps for most of their lives, they have filed this under one explanation: intelligence, sensitivity, depth. I simply pay more attention than other people. That explanation is comfortable, it is flattering, and it is incomplete. Here is what it misses. The ability to notice subtle emotional cues in other people is not evenly distributed across humanity because some people are simply smarter. It is unevenly distributed because some people needed it more. Think about that for a moment. Some people grew up in environments that were stable, predictable, emotionally legible. A calm household, consistent parents, safety that did not need to be calculated in advance. Those people often move through the world without scanning it constantly. They are not less intelligent. They simply never had to develop that particular instrument. Now think about the child who grew up in a different kind of environment. A home where the mood of a parent could shift without warning. A family where tension lived in the silences. A childhood where reading the room was not a preference but a form of survival. That child learns very quickly to watch, to track, to anticipate. The mind is extraordinarily efficient. It does not develop skills it does not need. But when it does need a skill, urgently, early, repeatedly, it sharpens that skill to a degree most people never reach. This is what I mean when I say that perception is often not a gift. It is an adaptation. Now let me be precise about the mechanism because this is important. When a person grows up needing to read emotional signals carefully, the nervous system calibrates itself toward threat detection. The brain begins to treat social environments the way a soldier treats unfamiliar terrain. Every facial expression is data. Every shift in tone is a signal. Every slight delay in a response is something to be analyzed. There is a structure in the brain, the amygdala, that processes threat. In people who have experienced early unpredictability or chronic tension or emotional instability in their closest relationships, this structure becomes highly activated. It learns to scan, constantly, automatically, below the level of conscious thought. This is why some people walk into a room and immediately feel the emotional temperature before a word is spoken. They are not performing some mystical act of perception. They are running a program that was written into them by experience. The technical term for this is hypervigilance. But that word does not quite capture what it feels like from the inside. From the inside, it feels like clarity, like awareness, like seeing more than the people around you. And here is the strange part. It is clarity. The perception is often real. The readings are often accurate. The insight is genuine. But the mechanism behind it is not serenity. It is alertness. And there is a very large difference between those two things. Let me give you a concrete example. You are sitting in a meeting at work. Something is being discussed. The people around the table are listening to what is being said. You are listening to something else entirely. You are watching how one person's posture shifted when a particular name was mentioned. You noticed that someone's laugh was slightly too fast to be real. You registered the half-second of hesitation before a particular answer was given. The others left that meeting thinking everything was fine. You left it knowing that there is tension between two people in that room, that one person is not being truthful about something, and that something beneath the surface is moving, and you were probably right. But ask yourself this: while you were detecting all of that, were you also relaxed? Were you fully present in the conversation itself? Or was part of you operating as an observer, slightly removed, continuously processing? Most people who are exceptionally good at reading others will recognize something in that description. The reading is almost involuntary. They cannot simply decide to stop scanning. The instrument is always running. That is the cost that no one mentions when they call this perception a gift. Now I want to introduce a second layer, and this one is more uncomfortable. Not everything you detect in others is purely what exists in them. Some of it is what exists in you. There is a process the mind uses that I have studied extensively. It is called projection, and it works like this. We all carry within us feelings, impulses, and qualities that we find difficult to acknowledge. Anger that feels dangerous, selfishness that conflicts with our self-image, fear that seems shameful, desires we cannot quite accept. When these internal contents are too threatening to own consciously, the mind performs a quiet displacement. It places them outward. It sees them in other people instead of in the self. Now, here is how this becomes relevant to perception. When you look at another person and you sense something in them, you are not seeing them through a clear pane of glass. You are seeing them through your own psychological history, your own conflicts, your own patterns. Sometimes what you are detecting is genuinely there. The other person is angry or deceptive or frightened, and you are picking it up because your instrument is well calibrated. But sometimes what you are detecting is a resonance, a familiarity. You recognize something in them because it lives in you as well. And you call it perception when it is actually, in part, recognition. This does not make you wrong, but it makes you partially unreliable in ways you cannot easily detect from the inside. Think about the person who always, in every new relationship, eventually sees betrayal coming, who senses it early, predicts it, prepares for it. And often the betrayal does arrive, which confirms the perception completely. But what that person rarely examines is how their conviction of betrayal shaped the relationship itself, how the vigilance, the guardedness, the constant monitoring, the slight withdrawal of trust may have contributed to the very outcome they foresaw. The prediction feels like insight, but it may also be a self-completing mechanism. Let us talk about confirmation bias, because this is where perception becomes a hall of mirrors. You believe you see more than others. That belief, once established, begins to protect itself. When you read someone correctly, you remember it, you file it. It becomes evidence for your own perceptiveness. When you read someone incorrectly, when you misjudged the intention, when you were wrong about the motive, the mind tends to process that differently. It explains it away, it finds a reason, or it simply does not register it with the same weight. This is not unique to you. It is how the human mind works with any belief it holds about itself. But it is particularly powerful in the case of perceptiveness, because the very belief in question is about the accuracy of your own judgment. If I believe I am a good judge of character, then every time my judgment proves correct, I feel it. And every time it proves incorrect, my mind finds a way to preserve the underlying belief. I knew something was off. I just didn't act on it. Or, they fooled everyone, not just me. Or simply, I don't want to think about that one. The result is a self-reinforcing loop. You believe you see more. You notice when you were right. You minimize or reframe when you were wrong. The belief grows stronger, the identity solidifies, and here is where it becomes a problem. When perception hardens into identity, it stops being a tool. It becomes a requirement. You do not simply observe people, you must observe them. Because if you stop being perceptive, if you discover that you are sometimes wrong in your readings, something larger feels threatened. Not just your judgment, yourself. Now I want to talk about something that sits just underneath the surface of this whole pattern. Something most people who are exceptionally perceptive will recognize, but rarely name directly. It is the question of trust. The mind that observes constantly, that reads every signal, that processes every inconsistency, often holds something very specific back, even when the reading is favorable, even when the evidence suggests that a person is safe, genuine, worth trusting fully. The vigilance does not turn off, and this creates a particular kind of loneliness that is very difficult to explain to people who do not experience it. You can see people clearly, you can understand their motives, their fears, their patterns, sometimes better than they understand themselves. You can be warm toward them, you can even love them, but somewhere a door stays slightly closed. An internal reserve is maintained, full surrender to trust, the kind of trust that requires you to stop analyzing and simply be present, remains just out of reach. People around you may not notice this. You are perceptive, so you are also skilled at appearing connected. But you know the difference between observing someone and being with them. And observation, however accurate, is not the same as intimacy. This is the paradox I want to sit with for a moment. The sharpest perceptiveness often coexists with the deepest loneliness, not because perceptive people are cold, but because the same mechanism that makes them excellent at reading others makes it very difficult to stop reading and simply trust. Let me bring in another dimension here, the one that concerns cynicism. There is a form of intelligence that wears the mask of realism. It says, "I am not naive, I am not deceived, I see what people are really like, I have no illusions." This can be genuine. Some people have been given enough evidence of human unreliability that their skepticism is earned and calibrated. They have learned, correctly, that not everyone is trustworthy. But there is another version of this, a version where cynicism is not earned wisdom, but protective architecture, where the conviction that people are shallow, predictable, or fundamentally untrustworthy serves a different purpose entirely. Consider what cynicism accomplishes psychologically. If you have already decided that people are not worth trusting fully, then you never have to risk full trust. If you have already concluded that intimacy leads to disappointment, then you are protected from the vulnerability of hoping for something different. If your framework says that most people are unconscious and shallow, then your own distance from them feels like discernment rather than defense. Suspicion disguises itself as intelligence very effectively, and this is not a criticism. I want to be very clear about that. This mechanism exists because it once served a purpose. The mind does not build defenses arbitrarily. They are constructed in response to real experience, real pain, real moments when trust was extended and damaged. But the defense that was necessary at one point in life can become the prison of a later point. What protected you at 10 years old may be constraining you at 40. Here is the thought experiment I want you to try. Think of a person in your life who you have read accurately, someone whose character you understood clearly perhaps before others did. You saw who they were, and you were right. Now ask yourself this: while you were observing them, were you also letting them observe you? Were you equally available to be read, to be known, to be seen in return? Or was there an asymmetry? You watching them, you understanding them, and you in some way remaining slightly out of reach. This asymmetry is very common in people with high perceptive ability. They are extraordinarily good at understanding others. They are significantly less comfortable being understood themselves. The act of observation keeps them in the position of the one who knows, rather than the one who is known. And being known, being truly visible to another person, requires something very different from perception. It requires exposure. And exposure for the hypervigilant mind carries a risk that no amount of intelligence can completely neutralize. I want to address something now that I think needs to be said directly, because many people who will recognize themselves in this description will resist the next part. You are not simply more evolved than the people around you. You are not clearer sighted because your mind is inherently superior. There are people who move through the world with less vigilance, less continuous analysis, less sharpness of social perception, and they are not less intelligent. They are not less capable. They are, in many cases, simply less afraid. That sentence is worth sitting with. The scanning, the reading, the constant processing of signals, all of it runs on a kind of psychological fuel. And that fuel is not curiosity. It is not intellectual passion. In most cases, it is a version of alertness that has its roots in the need for safety. The most perceptive person in a room is not always the wisest. They are often the most guarded. And there is a difference between those two things that matters enormously. Let me talk about what I think of as the armor that becomes skin. Early in life, if the emotional environment was unpredictable, the mind develops tools. One of those tools is the ability to read and predict, to get ahead of danger, to understand the person in front of you well enough that you are never entirely surprised. This is protective. In a child, it is adaptive, it is intelligent. But as that child grows into an adult, the armor remains. Not because the danger remains, but because the armor has been worn so long that it no longer feels like armor. It feels like personality. It feels like identity. You do not say, "I am vigilant because I had to be." You say, "I am perceptive. I am an observer. I am someone who sees clearly." The origin dissolves. The structure remains. And what was once a response to a specific set of circumstances becomes a permanent way of being in the world. This is not a failure. It is simply what the human mind does with its adaptations. It integrates them. It builds an identity around them. It tells a story that makes them feel chosen rather than created by necessity. The person who grew up needing to read emotional signals becomes the adult who prides themselves on their emotional intelligence. The child who learned to stay slightly removed to stay safe becomes the adult who values independence and self-reliance above all else. Neither of these things is wrong, but both of them are easier to carry when you can see them clearly. Now I want to describe the emotional cost in specific terms because I think it is often underestimated. Perceiving people at high resolution is exhausting, not in a way that always feels dramatic. Often it is a quiet background exhaustion, a heaviness after social interactions that others seem to leave energized by, a sense of having processed far more information than anyone around you realizes, a kind of fatigue that is difficult to explain because, from the outside, you were simply having a conversation. But you were not simply having a conversation. You were simultaneously present in the conversation, monitoring the emotional weather, tracking inconsistencies, filing impressions, making predictions, and maintaining a performance of ease that concealed all of that internal activity. That is a significant cognitive and emotional load, and it is nearly always invisible to others, because the same skill that makes you perceptive also makes you good at not showing how much you are carrying. Here is a pattern many will recognize. You leave a social gathering and you need to be alone, not because you did not enjoy it, but because you need to decompress from the sheer volume of what you absorbed. Others are still buzzing with energy. You feel as though you have run a long distance. To see more is to carry more. That is not poetic, that is mechanical. Let me bring us to a distinction that I think is the most important one in this entire discussion. There are two kinds of perceptiveness, and they look very similar from the outside, but they come from entirely different places and lead to entirely different lives. The first kind is what I have been describing largely until now, perception born from vigilance, from the need to predict, from the calibration of a nervous system that learned early to treat the social world as terrain that required careful navigation. This perception is often accurate, it is genuinely insightful, but it is fundamentally defensive. It serves safety more than understanding. The second kind is rarer. It is perception that comes from genuine curiosity about other people, from a quality of attention that is not scanning for threat, but genuinely interested in the interior life of another human being. This perception also reads people well, but it holds its readings more lightly. It remains open to being wrong. It is willing to be surprised. And crucially, it coexists with trust. The difference is not always visible in the output. Both kinds of people notice things others miss. Both read rooms with unusual accuracy. Both seem to understand people at a level that surprises the people they understand. But the first kind is ultimately lonely in a specific way. They understand people but struggle to be with people. They read others clearly but hold themselves back from being read. They are close to many people and deeply known by very few. The second kind has made a different trade. They may be less vigilant, less reliably accurate. They may occasionally be deceived by someone they trusted. But they are capable of a quality of presence and connection that pure observation, no matter how sharp, cannot reach. There is one more misconception I want to address before I bring this toward its close. Many people who feel they see more than others also believe privately that this perception makes them right, not just more observant, correct, that their readings of people are simply the truth of those people. But perception is always filtered. Every observation you make passes through your own history, your own wounds, your own unresolved patterns, your own emotional needs. This does not make your observations worthless, it makes them partial. The person who grew up with an angry parent may be extraordinarily good at detecting anger in others. They may notice it earlier, more accurately than almost anyone. But they may also detect anger where it does not exist, reading something as anger that is really something else, exhaustion perhaps, or sadness, or a kind of inward preoccupation that has nothing to do with them at all. The instrument is accurate in its range, but its range has been shaped by specific experience. A magnifying glass is more powerful than the naked eye, but it also distorts scale. It makes some things larger than they are. It narrows the field of view. Not everything you detect is true. Some of it is signal, some of it is noise. And the mind that is most confident in its own perception is often the least equipped to distinguish between the two. Let me bring all of this together now. You do see things others don't. I am not here to take that from you. The perception is real. The readings are often accurate. The ability to sense what is happening beneath the surface of conversations, relationships and rooms is genuine. But what I have tried to show you is where that ability lives. Not in superior intellect alone, not in some innate clarity of vision that others were simply not born with. In most cases, it lives in adaptation, in a nervous system that was sharpened by necessity, in an early emotional education that trained you to pay the kind of attention that most people never had sufficient reason to develop. And with that comes something important to understand. Your perception is not neutral. It is colored by everything that created it, by the relationships that taught you to scan, by the moments that taught you that trust required verification, by the experiences that made you excellent at observing and somewhat more cautious about being observed. You have spent much of your life looking outward with unusual clarity. The question worth sitting with, perhaps the most important question this awareness can produce, is how clearly you look inward. Because what you see in others is not only a reflection of them, it is also, always, a reflection of you, of your history, of what you were once looking for, of what you learned to expect. The sharpest perception does not come from distance, it comes from understanding the instrument itself. That instrument is you, and if you can see it, not just through its outputs, not just through the accuracy of your readings, but through its origins, its costs, its distortions, and its remarkable hard-won strengths, then something changes. You are no longer only watching the world. You are finally, and perhaps for the first time, watching yourself watching it. And that is a different kind of clarity entirely.